So just to pick up, do people have access? I put in the chat the Google Drive link to the questions, but we can also copy the questions into the chat if you need help with that. I don't know how people are accessing. Maybe if you're on your phone, it's not so easy. I was just going to say something. I have a few little slides and just say something about this. The specific question tonight: are we just a third chimpanzee? It was actually Jared Diamond, the author Jared Diamond, who had a book, The Third Chimpanzee, which was lining us up as amongst the other great apes, just making this point very strongly. And one of the video resources there, the Richard Wrangham, somebody was just talking about it, Spike was just talking about it. He is a person who's very notable researcher of chimpanzees and who tends to make arguments that there is a lot of continuity between human and chimpanzee, but also certain discontinuities of human and chimpanzee behaviors. I was just going to share screen briefly to kind of show, if I can find it. Let's have a look. Can people see?
Yes.
Yeah, you got the thing there. So I mean, it's quite, if you pick up photos and film of chimps, it's quite easy to get why people would think, even though chimps have quite different distinctive look and bodies and physical aspects, that there's lots of aspects of chimpanzees that do look like they are like us. It's quite easy to understand that. There's expressing a lot of similar emotions, expressions. I don't know if anybody saw the little press release by University of St Andrews about their research on chimpanzee and bonobo gesture, where they were showing that ordinary people who had no training could interpret the gestures of chimps and bonobos and get it right a lot of the time. And they were suggesting, well, we've got a heritage as great apes. And that means that probably going back to our ancestry, there's just certain amount of stuff that we do share. But let's just check on exactly where that ancestry links up. So on that chart, it's quite a helpful chart showing that last common ancestor of all the hominins leading to us as Homo sapiens right at the end of the line. We are now the only hominin left on the planet. And we've only been modern humans for 300,000 years. So that's a pretty short period out of the whole 6 or 7 million years back to that shared ancestor. And on the other branch, chimpanzees and bonobos, the panins, coming back down into the last million years, chimpanzees and bonobos are pretty close relatives, but they've separated out in the last million years. And Chris may tell us about that at some stage. We know several hominin species that have been part of the evolution of hominins through that 6 million year down to modern humans. Some of these species may have actually been our ancestors. Australopithecus afarensis, famously Lucy, quite likely to have been an ancestor of modern humans. Homo erectus, almost surely an ancestor of ourselves and our very close cousins, the Neanderthals. And they are very close relatives, sister line, because we know for sure that Neanderthals and us, we had babies together. And there are many people in the world who are carrying evidence of Neanderthal genetics. Recently, Svante Pääbo, who showed that, recently got a Nobel Prize. When it comes to the panins, chimps and bonobos, we've got a big gap of what really happened in that 6 million years that they went down that lineage. and what what are the species that actually were there. We haven't got fossil evidence. They're forest living species, so it's very hard to get it. But what we're looking at is effectively 12 million years between us as modern humans, going back 6 million years or more to a common ancestor, and coming back down 6 million years to the Pannins, to the chimps and bonobos today. So we've got 12 million years for differences to start evolving. So there's a lot of possibility for difference, and we can see evident differences between ourselves and chimps and bonobos, but also we can understand that there's reasons to look for certain continuity from a shared ancestor. So having kind of said that, that's setting up what our perspective is tonight. We're obviously evolutionary scientists working within an evolutionary perspective, and I expect most people are kind of in agreement with that. But if anybody has any issues with that, you're welcome to raise them. Have we got somebody very helpfully copied our workshop questions? Thank you, Catherine. And I'm suggesting that we've got just about enough people to run a single workshop. I don't know if you want to make a breakout and have it smaller. What do people feel, or stick together?
I'm happy to stick together.
Yeah, let's do that, and just don't feel perfectly at ease to interrupt. We're not putting this recording out publicly, so let's stick together. So yeah, we're not expecting everybody has a lot of knowledge, in particular of primates, monkeys, or apes, but from generally kind of common background knowledge, you may be able to work out some of the issues. So let's just go think about some of these similarities or differences. What do we think about this? We're starting with just like physical aspects, bodies, differences, or similarities.
I think the physical differences would be the first issue on our workshop question list. So the differences in body size and weight and muscle and face, which, as you said, right on first glance, is quite apparent. Maybe we can look a little bit at the similarities.
Well, those pictures that Camilla showed at the beginning of the chimp taking postures, stances that we readily want to sort of identify with and think, sort of see some similarities there, as that there is, it would appear from just those pictures alone, some psychological commonalities, emotional.
I think possibly when someone would see that photo of the chimp sitting there cross-legged, they may think that's a chimp imitating a human. But what if it's not, and it's humans imitating chimps?
Well, I mean, we have certain basic body plans that are kind of, that lead to sort of similar postures in certain positions. Yeah. And yeah, that chimp comes across as really, just
trying
really
to be human.
sitting there at the end. It's quite a funny picture I just saw the other day. Jay, do you want to speak?
Hi, yeah, if that's okay. I'm just something which is on my mind quite a lot. It just, one of the things which pops up for me every so often is I used to watch David Attenborough quite a lot, and there was footage of chimpanzees on there because, you know, why wouldn't there be? And I'm someone with ADHD, and I find myself sort of doing what I understand as stimming quite a lot. So doing little movements that sort of work for me in various different ways. And one of the ones that I used to do quite a lot as a child was something which I saw chimpanzees doing while grooming each other, I think, which is just sort of smacking their lips together and making little noises, which it's something which I find myself doing quite a lot because it's a very easy movement. It's just there. So just that.
Lip smacking. How amazing. Is anybody else doing lip smacking? Interesting one. Yeah.
So based on Jay's comment, I find myself curious if some of the things that we do instinctively as humans, stimming, for example, in people who have ADHD, I understand is a response, a way to either self-soothe or deal with some stimuli that you are, trying to handle within yourself. And I wonder if, the similarities that will show up, Jay picking up on the lip smacking, if amongst chimps and bonobos and amongst humans are just in, traces of that common lineage that are manifesting in different ways, an instinctive almost response to being in the world with all the stimuli around us.
Have we got any more thoughts about difference? Just to let's try and be gross about it, just to progress what are obvious differences. I mean, we've said, Chris mentioned, bipedality is a clear and obvious difference, and yet some of those ancestors that were bipedal that were just on that chart may have been very ape-like in many respects. Have we got any other points about difference? Just very basic points.
I have a huge list.
Great.
That I've been keeping over the years.
What is
let me bring this over. Okay, I have genetics, bipedalism, jaws and teeth, brain and its size and caloric requirements, gut versus gut and its caloric requirements, diaphragm and breath control, menopausal grandmothers.
But when you're saying that, you mean that humans have them, chimps don't? There it's a distinction.
Yeah. I can go on.
Yeah. If we pick up some of the questions in the workshop, just to clarify for people. I mean, you're touching on very important ones.
Oh, yeah, like I said, I've been kind of adding to this list over the years, because I find the topic so fascinating. Yep. So that's just at the kind of the very large scale differences that I started with, and then it winds up kind of moving into much more picky little differences. Anyway,
yeah, there's quite a lot to go on.
Yeah. Yes.
Can I chuck in a couple more there?
Yep. We've got people who want to talk, but go in.
Yeah. Body fat. We humans have much more body fat, and particularly infants.
Mm-hmm. It's on my list.
Good. People, Michael, Elena, Jacek, Michael, do you want to say?
Yeah. Hello.
Hello.
Yeah. Well, I remember from Jared Diamond the striking difference between us and the chimps. He stressed a couple of times in his famous book with regard to the reproductive organs, right? So one of the chief questions of the third chimpanzee was why their penises are so small, which he tried to combine with some theory on general differences in sexual behavior and with far-reaching conclusions, maybe too far-reaching. I don't know. I'm here to get to know.
Okay. So sexual reproductive organs, yeah, I think is a critical issue, and with that sexual behavior, and then we could think about chimps and bonobos as well, regarding that. Are the
Well,
differences?
their behavior differs quite a lot, as far as I know.
But are these differences, sex and reproductive organs, actually the most with males necessarily, or?
Between chimps and the bonobos?
Well, chimps, bonobos, and us.
Well, there seems to be huge differences both in the reproductive behavior and in the social organization, right, between us chimps and bonobos, and it seems to be interrelated.
Yeah. Anybody else on that? Eleanor, do you want to speak?
It was much more basic. It was about the hairier. The chimpanzees are much hairier. Also about body fat, about females and babies. The white in the eyes.
What difference with females and babies are you thinking?
The body fat.
Body
of,
fat.
Of body fat.
Human babies are fat babies, yes.
And female, human
females are fat.
Than
yes.
Sexual dimorphism. I think it's.
Is there a big? What are the dimorphic aspects? How much difference?
I don't. But I think the male chimp is always bigger than the females. Yeah.
And then that question rises: well, are human males bigger than females? And I'm not sure there is that much difference on sexual dimorphism. Maybe a little.
Okay.
Bonobos. But yeah, it's an important.
And I think diet is very different. What we are eating is very different.
Yeah. In what ways? There's similarity and there's difference, isn't there?
I think we eat much more meat. We don't have that. We don't eat that many fruit and veg. We cannot eat raw leaves.
Do chimps eat raw leaves? Do bonobos?
Yeah, that's
not. They are generally not eating. They're not like so much like gorillas, are they? But yeah, we should look at diet issues. I didn't put diet in there very much, but yeah. Should we go? What about? I mean, we talked about male sex dimorphism, but in terms of strength and muscle and so on, chimps, bonobos, comparative to us, comparative to Homo sapiens,
so much stronger.
They're massively strong. I mean, they are seriously strong. Incredible muscles. And in terms of body weight, what about body weight actually? Can you help us there with that, Kathy?
Don't have that one on my list. But my sense has always been that their strength per body weight is much greater.
Yeah. I think chimps maybe is slightly less, but it's not that much difference actually for the males. Not that much difference, but slightly smaller. Has anybody got any good data on that? But it's not massive difference. But in terms of strength, yeah, chimps muscle bound comparatively. I've got a few pictures that help show that. Other things about jaws and teeth that Kathy was talking about, What about the sheer size, the shape of the face? And we can see the differences of the shape of the face. A human face is really flat, and we really are surprisingly, and this is true for genus Homo, very flat face comparative to chimps. Other things, fingers and toes, skin, we've kind of talked about, the hair. Movement, what about movement? We said a little bit about it, but
I think Michael has his hand up.
go for it.
Michael.
Yeah, I was just thinking too, the similarities and the differences. I mean, you're talking about the movements, and one thing that's always kind of impressed upon me is, the chimpanzees, they're like so expressive, they got so many, the facial muscles, they have so many facial muscles just like we have, and they're able to do all these facial expressions. But I also wonder if that's also kind of a difference, because how much, this maybe isn't a physical difference, but symbolically, like, are they able to really think symbolically? Does that facial expression really translate into symbolic thinking ability? And also, the differences, I mean, they're much more robust than us. And I think, and again, this, I think, the differences and the similarities, I think the physical and the mental are very connected to each other. I think maybe there's, humans have a little bit more control of their emotions, maybe.
Yeah, so that's something that Richard Wrangham was especially emphasizing in relation to violence, and we'll talk a bit more about conflict. Jay, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I'm gonna just bring in neurodiversity again, because that's immediately where my mind went in terms of, I'm sure people have come across this sort of something which I'm sure a lot of folks, but something which comes up quite a lot in discourse in neurodiverse spaces is, differences in what it's safe to show on your face, what you might want to show on your face, and things like that. And I think quite a lot of the time, or at least something which comes up quite a lot with these people's experiences, is that actually what's on your face doesn't necessarily line up with what you're thinking, or there's this huge amount of thought that you have to put into sort of being okay with what's on your face, which it's thinking ability, but I don't know. It feels like it's in a slightly different realm to the idea of deciding that you're going to express anger on your face and all of that. It just as something that popped up for me.
Okay, that's a really interesting point. And at some point we're going to be talking about particularly eyes and ape eyes, and what that's indicating about kind of intersubjectivity, when so-called cooperative eyes hypothesis, which I think links in to that understanding how you look to another person and how they're reading what you're thinking, is one of the critical issues that, if anybody managed to read Tomasello's chapter, would be coming out of that as well. Should we go on to think, if we've sort of thought about physical aspects, that's a baseline of difference. What about social and cultural aspects? Some people have already been thinking about this. I mean, we've just got Chimp Society there, but I think the updated PDF was also saying, let's think about bonobos too, because they're very interesting to compare as very close relatives. Socially and culturally, what about Chimp Society or Bonobo Society? Ways they can be very similar or very different for us. This is sometimes why people think of us, so we're just chimpanzees, because sometimes people in a kind of pop science way are just saying, oh, look, we're just doing the same kind of scheming or politicking that chimpanzees do. What about chimpanzees? Have they got families, relatives, how do they relate to other chimps? Can we talk about getting married? What about their emotions? Do they express love and care? Do they have friends? What do we think about any of that? And then we can think about politics, maybe.
There's a million different ways you could go with it. I mean, chimpanzees seem to have a lot of similarities behaviorally with us. I mean, you know, everything from showing cooperative behavior, showing altruistic behavior, even though, you know, you could go into the debate about whether or not it really is altruistic or how altruistic it is. Cooperative, I think you mentioned this before, the cooperative caring of the young. I mean, there's so many different things. And this is just sort of a random thought, but I mean, are you familiar with like the story of Oliver the humanzee? Where there was this chimpanzee that they were sort of touting back in 60s or 70s as being like a quote unquote chimp human hybrid. I mean, he wasn't, of course, but, you know, I think that just, you know, underlines this, how they are so similar to us that like one of them could even be passed off as like a chimp human hybrid.
But you just mentioned cooperative breeding. Now, is that something that is characteristic for chimps or bonobos? And that is something that's going to be a big topic for us in the third meeting we're having. What about that? Helen, do you want to?
I just want to make sure I get David's comment in the chat in. He talks about chimpanzees appear to struggle with non-hunting group cooperation situations, particularly when not dealing with other known individuals, and sapiens, that is us humans, appear to be better able to find group consensus irrespective of language differences. And I don't know if you want to add anything to that, David, before we go on.
David, you're muted.
Muted.
I'm not sure if I did that correctly.
But we can hear you now.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. I can't think of any specific examples other than the fact that whenever I've seen chimpanzees on TV, they appear to be very able to cooperate if they're hunting, but the minute that they come across other chimpanzees who are not of the same troop, it almost descends into a level of aggression, which Homo sapiens seem to be able, with the exception of obvious examples at the moment, we seem to be able to get along together even when there's hundreds of other Homo sapiens, often who can't speak the same language. Yeah, I'm not sure that I have the answer. I just have the question. Sorry, Helen.
Great. Chris, do you want to say something about the differences between chimps, bonobos, and us in regard to relating to strangers?
Well, okay. So it is completely wrong to think that there's a kind of specifically chimpanzee style of social life that's somehow just wrong to say chimpanzees, for example, are highly male dominated and competitive and warfare-like and so on. I mean, so it really does depend to quite a large extent on the kind of environment the chimps are living in. So it is true that the chimps we're probably most aware of, we've known about for the longest, the Gombe stream chimps that Jane Goodall began by studying, and that Richard Wrangham was also studying, is they are very male dominated. Every male dominates every female, and as the chimps come of age, the males they kind of make sure they beat up every female in the group. Even the smaller or younger males make sure they can beat up all the females, when just to make a point that they're on top. But although that's true of Gombe stream chimps, that's on the far sort of eastern range of the area within chimps are found living in the wild. Right across the other side of the eastern range, right over to the west, and places like Thai forests, the resources are much more abundant. And where the resources are more abundant, the females can afford to forage together. So what goes on is that where there's very little food around, the females are very anxious not to have any competition. It's like each female needs her own cabbage patch, and if other females kind of invade their cabbage patch, their local area, they're very hostile. They're very hostile against like immigrants coming into their patch, and because they're isolated, because they don't want to forage with each other, they're not able to form strong alliances, and because they're isolated, that opens the door for the males to dominate the females quite intensively. But if just to take Thai forest, the subsistence is much more abundant, and the females can, up to a point, forage together. Therefore, they form everyday alliances, and therefore they make it much harder for the males to dominate them. And then we have the fact that across the Congo River on the south side, some chimps made it across the river in a period when the river was quite low, and they could make it across, perhaps just managed to swim or wade across to the south side of the river, and there they found themselves almost in a paradise. Lots of wetlands, all kinds of resources, all kinds of eggs, waterfowl, lily bulbs. I mean, masses of food really, and that meant the females were so capable of sharing the territory among themselves that they formed alliances to such an extent that everything was turned upside down socially. And unlike the common chimps north of the Congo, south of the Congo, they evolved essentially matriarchal social relationships. So among the bonobos, females dominate because they form relationships, and they use they use sexuality. One female, she meets another female, and the two females could compete for the food, instead of which they do the Gigi rubbing. They spend quite a long time on having sex, and they're having bonded through sex. They're then in a position to kind of beat up any male that gets some food and tries to take it from them. And then even further than that, what happens is that we have what's called the offspring defense hypothesis as the basic logic of bonobo society. So it's very important that bonobos are chimpanzees. We call them bonobos because they're rather different, but they've only evolved divergently from the common chimps for about 1 million years. So it hasn't taken very long to turn a patriarchal society into matriarchal society. But what happens then is that any male will be kind of scared of annoying a baby. So you can get a fruit falling from a tree. The baby starts to eat the fruit. The male might feel, well, why can't I eat that fruit? And he won't do that because he knows that if he annoys the baby, will cry, and then the male will be kind of beaten up by the mother, but not just the mother of the infant that's crying or getting annoyed, but her allies as well. And so you have, in a sense, the ruling part of the local population will consist of infants. It's almost as if infants are dominant, thanks to the fact that the mothers are always watching after them, and the mothers have got lots of allies. So the idea that you have a sort of chimp social system is not really correct. It's much more variable, and it's not really determined by genetics, except within some limits.
Okay, so are we wasting our time here? or do we need to be more nuanced about what are the factors that would influence on a large evolutionary timescale differences between ourselves and chimpanzee lineage?
Just very briefly, again, it's just that females always want to choose their sexual partners. Freedom of choice, freedom of sexual choice is always something which female higher primates, chimpanzees kind of want. But of course, it all depends on whether they can, what the costs are, and it's just that females would choose, if you like, sexual freedom of choice if it wasn't that the heavy costs are involved. But actually, they don't have a lot of choice, because basically with common chimps, the females end up with the dominant alpha male, and of course it's in the interest of those females to mate with the most dominant males, because then of course their offspring, the male offspring, will be likely to have their genetic qualities. So from a genetic point of view, or female interests, fitness interests, it makes sense to mate with the dominant males. But still, they don't like being pushed around if they can avoid it. And with chimpanzee females, okay, one of the critical things with bonobos, no primatologist has ever recorded an instance of rape or sexual harassment by a male among bonobos, whereas among common chimps, it's actually kind of everywhere.
Lots of coercion.
Dominant males and older brothers are always trying to have sex with their sisters and mothers and so on, and it doesn't matter how much the females resist it because they want to choose themselves who's they're going to have sex with. The dominant male, even if it's a relative, will try to get away with harassing them and even coercing them. That never happens with bonobos. So, but yet the genetics are almost identical in the two groups, in the two populations.
So David's point was about the responses to strangers. So what about chimpanzees in relation to strangers? David was mentioning that there is a lot of aggression if there's group on group, like meeting at the boundaries. This is something that John Mitani with the Ngogo chimps has demonstrated.
That is again an extraordinary contrast between bonobos and common chimps. The bonobos have, it's almost legitimate to call it warfare. I mean, they have the males patrol their boundaries.
Chimps do that.
Common chimps will patrol the boundaries of their territory. A bunch of chimps, pretty much related, probably brothers or cousins, will patrol the whole boundary containing all the different females. And then every now and again they'll invade the neighboring territory, and if they come across an enemy chimp, they'll attempt to kill that chimp. But that doesn't happen with bonobos, and so it's really interesting because the bonobos, they also have territories, kind of territories, but what happens is almost the opposite, because the females are so powerful that when they're moving towards the boundaries of what you might think of as their territory, what happens is that their males get a bit worried because they're pretty sure the females will favor not them, but their, if you like, the quote enemy males. So imagine a group of bonobo females moving towards the boundary. Their males will get quite anxious about it because what tends to happen is that the females will make an alliance with the other females. They'll combine together to beat up their own males and have sex with the enemy males. So it's almost like a reverse warfare dynamic with bonobos. So it's just so incorrect. For example, it's so incorrect to sort of simply say that chimpanzees are warlike. I mean, it really does depend on circumstances, and it's also wrong to say that chimpanzees are intensively patriarchal, male-dominated. It's often true, perhaps typically true for common chimps in their part of the world, north of the Congo River, but it really does depend on circumstances.
And in the resources we listed, there's a very excellent video from Richard Wrangham where he's talking about, he does consider there is some sort of evolutionary continuity of warfare and lethal violence, but he also considers there are differences in the responses of our responses to threat and violent responses. But he's talking about situations with chimpanzees on the edges of their territory, where they will produce very violent displays, but it's a lot of noise and thunder, really. It's a lot of noise and screaming and pant hooting rather than actually going into attack mode. If the chimps in the other group are pretty much equal numbers, equal strength, but if they can find a chimpanzee who's by themselves, a male chimpanzee by themselves, or even a female by herself, they will attack, they will creep up, they will be very quiet, they will creep up, they will attack. If they know that they're attacking a lone individual, they will do that, and they will leave that individual in a very, very bad state. But Wrangham considers that is quite similar in terms of warfare strategy tactics to humans in many ways. Jacek, did you want to say something?
Think you're muted.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. A couple of questions related to what you just said. Do the chimps have any? Have we observed any mechanisms which would enable a certain degree of control of aggression within the group? That's my first question, because they are aggressive towards strangers, even if the stranger comes from their own group. Yeah, there were cases where they attacked basically their cousins who split earlier. But how is the aggression within the group regulated? Do they have any instinctive mechanism for that? Because I think the humans, as far as we know, the hunters gatherers, they have some kind of sanction. They sanction intergroup aggression, don't they? There is it doesn't go without saying if one hunter gatherer kills another for no reason. Am I right here or not? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And second, what about the families? As far as I know, neither chimps nor bonobos form family. The males are not engaged in childcare, aren't they? They do not care about their babies, so it's always the matter of the mothers. Yeah. And it's also different from early humans, as far as we can imagine they have lived.
Okay, so that's quite a lot to ask about. You're asking important questions in terms of differences of violence. Again, we can talk about within the group. In terms of males, there are some very important studies of chimps, particularly by Frans de Waal. Frans de Waal researched chimpanzees in captive situations in the Arnhem Zoo. It was a very famous series of chimpanzee politics and peacemaking among primates. They're beautiful books to read, but they were captive. However, the ways that the males achieved kind of leadership, the ways that males became dominant males, was, as Chris mentioned, first of all, they had to demonstrate their ability to beat up all the females effectively. And then if they were able to show that a current dominant male could not protect the females from being beaten up by the new upcoming male, then that would be how that new upcoming male would take the dominance rank. And then once he was in that dominance rank, he would assert leadership role by being protective, like policing violence in the way that you're suggesting. So it's basically, could a dominant male, was he so secure as a dominant male that he could stop other males being violent to females? He could achieve that high rank.
That's Hobbes pure, isn't it?
It's sorry?
It's Hobbes, Thomas Hobbes pure.
Well, it sounds
it's like they let the dominant male beat them in order he could protect them from others beating them.
That's exactly right. And there's one more thing, of course, if I could just carry on. There's a vocalization called wah barking. And what de Waal said in the same book as Camilla was talking about is when a kind of rogue male is, I don't know, causing absolute chaos and havoc by racing around trying to beat up a junior male who's been having sex with one of his females, causing mayhem, endangering the infants and stuff. What begins to happen is that the females start to do this wah barking until there's a huge chorus of wah 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 wah, and it's almost like it's like a collective resistance threatening to beat up the male if he carries on. This kind of rogue male, and what happens is that this wah barking intensifies and intensifies and intensifies, and until at last the male just leaves off all this chasing around trying to beat up a junior rival male, and gets the message, which is that if he does carry on, the females will go beyond just wild barking and actually themselves take measures to beat him up. So that's very, very interesting, because we think in RAG, many of us, we think there's something like that female resistance to violence, collective resistance to violence, is what eventually transformed politics among humans that eventually became us. And that's in contrast to what Richard Wrangham says, because Richard Wrangham claims that human females do not form alliances, and neither do chimps in general. I think he sort of must admit that sometimes female chimps do form alliances, because he can't really deny it, especially with bonobos, of course. But then he says that the bonobo example has got
chimps tend to form alliances more. Females tend to form alliances more in captive circumstances, because they have less problem about feeding, about foraging.
It's just because of resources. That's right. In the Arnhem Zoo, they're well fed. The females can forage together. They don't even need to forage. They get supplied with food. Something like that happens with the bonobos. So as soon as the females can get together, they can afford to share, the foraging amongst themselves in localized areas. Then they do acquire the capacity to resist being beaten up, and you get a much more peaceful situation. And what's just paradoxical, difficult to understand, is that Wrangham says that human females never form alliances, and that although he admits that bonobos do form alliances and they're related to us, he thinks that chimpanzees, that the bonobo example is irrelevant. That we need to follow what happens among chimpanzees, and that explains human warfare.
Helen, did you want to come in now?
Yeah, so listening to the conversation, it sounds to me like access to resources really is the deciding factor on if or not a community of humans, bonobos, or chimps will evolve towards a more male dominant or female alliance type situation. So my question is, if, looking hundreds of thousands or millions of years in the future, if it's possible that chimp society might evolve if, access to resources sort of led them to a situation where there wasn't so much competition, is that a possibility at all?
I don't think it's a possibility, but in principle, it's what would happen over a few million years if chimps continue to evolve somewhere and there was plenty of resources around. I think then the females would forage together, and they would have this, their resistance would have a similar effect, going in something like a direction, perhaps roughly like what happened with bonobos, probably not like what happened with humans.
Yeah, but bonobos are the natural experiment for that.
That's right.
Kind of thing.
Yeah. But that's exactly right, Helen. It's exactly right. It's like for freedom and harmony, social harmony, you need abundance, because as soon as there's scarcity, you're gonna get competition for the scarce resources that are around. I mean, that applies across the board. Scarcity produces conflict.
Jacek, again, we didn't really respond to your question about families, because I think
no problem. I have another.
Yeah, you wanted to go on, yeah.
No, I just ad vocem. Do I understand correctly that you are suggesting that chimps are capable of cultural evolution?
Well, they're certainly capable of cultural evolution, but whether it's the ratchet effect, whether they can cumulatively evolve more and more and more culture the way humans did, is another matter. But there's no doubt chimpanzees have culture. They have all kinds of techniques.
Well, they use different tools depending on the region, right? That's
different tools and different kind of handshakes, different manners, all sorts of things which are culturally specific, and they're cultural traditions passed on down the generations. No question about it. But
basically, what you've said means that there is this potential for different, even divergent waves of evolving culturally for them, just as for us, which would be a similarity, and we're looking for similarities and differences.
One thing is cultural evolution, and another thing completely different is symbolic culture. And I think our view would be that although bonobos and chimps have some potential for symbolic culture, in the wild they just don't do it. They just don't need or use symbols at all of any kind. So even though they can, because as soon as you get a bonobo in a human family or a chimp in a human family, bring them up, they are able to use something like sign language to communicate. Although they don't communicate with each other, they tend to communicate with the human carers. But among each other, leave them to each other, and they certainly don't need anything remotely like sign language or any kind of language. They compete in the normal way they might in the wild.
Same as dogs, as a matter of fact.
I would think dogs are more human, probably, than.
But dogs can communicate with the humans, right?
Dogs are more human than wild living chimps. I would say a lot more, actually. But I don't know.
More used to understanding humans and making themselves understood. Yeah. Jay, and then Michael, and then maybe we'll move on to the cooperation aspect and the cultural aspect. Jay?
Yeah, I hope it's all right to ask this. I was quite surprised by the distinction between cultural I don't know anything about this, but cultural evolution and symbolic culture being separate things. Because throughout what I was hearing about coming across new resources, meaning that conflict goes down, meaning that I guess that there's a space for different behaviors to be for bonobos to come to different behaviors. I'm thinking about the experience of the different individuals in these groups and the things that they might be responding to. And I guess one question would be, does then sort of a climate of violence or a climate of peace or abundance of certain things as a result of individuals' behaviors, does that not count as symbolic culture?
No, it
doesn't. Does Ian want to say anything, or Chris want to say anything?
Yeah, okay, very briefly. I mean, if you're as an archaeologist, the things we sort of immediately recognize as they really are like us. That could be my granddad who painted the bulls in Lascaux, or that could be my grandmother who was buried 100,000 years ago with red ochre, or when we see the first beads. So that's how archaeologists diagnose symbolic culture, and that's very recent. That's right at the end of that time chart of ape and hominin evolution over the last 6 or 12 million years. It's like a matter of a few 100,000 years. Now, given all that flexibility that we've seen in chimps, behavioral flexibility in terms of sexual relations and power relations and how that maps onto, is in response to resourcing, I think it is going to be at the very end of the timeline that we're going to really come across these major distinctions. So maybe that's not for today, really. I think that's
maybe next time we'll talk more about it. But in terms of the questions on the workshop, I had some questions about do they dream? Do they share their dreams? Chimps, do they play? Do they dream? Do they share their dreams? And we could think about symbolic culture in terms of a virtual reality where people are kind of sharing something in imagination. And we don't have any real evidence whatsoever that there is that type of kind of cognitive, that expression of what is in one chimp's mind that they're trying to get across to another chimp's mind, that's something that's in their imagination. And that's, do you want to say, Chris?
Well, clearly chimps do often want to, signal to one another what they're intending to do, what they want. I mean, a chimp, as we've heard earlier, a chimp who wants to be groomed will point to the point of its body where it hopes the grooming will happen.
So that's very physical and indexical, yeah?
That's right. That's right. So chimps do want to be understood sometimes. They want to make what they're thinking sometimes available to another chimp if that's going to be helpful. But supposing a chimpanzee, I mean, we don't really know how much they dream, and I don't know. I have a feeling they don't really dream in sort of pictures the way we do, but given that we've got language, and as we speak to each other, and also as we speak to ourselves. As we think to ourselves, kind of linguistically, all kinds of images come to mind because that's how language works. It works through kind of metaphor. But I have a feeling that chimpanzees probably don't dream in images too much, or if at all. But anyway, the point is, even if a female chimpanzee did dream about a banana, would the other chimps be interested in a dream banana, in a hallucinatory drama? I mean, in other words, are chimps interested in one another's dreams? And I don't think they would be. I think they want real bananas. And the point is there that chimpanzees, like other animals, they live in the real world. Because we humans, we do live in the real world, but we also live in a world of shared faith and fantasy and religion, culture, theatre, all the stuff that has most meaning for us in many ways isn't the world of tables and chairs and rocks and stuff. It's all the stuff which are deeply meaningful to us, because we've invented this thing called religion, and language is actually for navigating within imaginary worlds, and that's what makes us so radically different. And I just want to stress one point, because so many people misunderstand what modern Darwinism is all about. It's just that in terms of, I mean, it is true that Darwin himself had all sorts of prejudices of the time, of his own time, and it was just like so many Victorian gentlemen. He was racist, sexist, and pretty unpleasant in many of the views he had. But still, he was a genius and invented, the theory of natural selection. But too many people, I feel, kind of misinterpret this whole Darwinism as kind of this idea of a ladder of progress and all that kind of nonsense. And in actual fact, as soon as we look at the kind of things that Ian's been researching in terms of the Oka record, it turns out that, for example, African people have always been in the lead of everything. And there's nothing more extraordinary than language, an African invention, religion, an African invention, kinship, an African invention. You could go through all the things which were invented by Africans far in advance of evolving humans in other parts of the world. And although it's true that Africans didn't invent slavery and colonialism and private property, all the things which matter most to us were invented by African people way in advance of all the rest of us. And I think that should be remembered. And in some ways, that sort of turns upside down some of the sort of prejudice and associations linked to sort of Darwinism. And people just haven't caught up with the kind of things we know now. So it was imagined, for example, that symbolic culture was invented by Europeans during a period called the Upper Paleolithic Revolution 40,000 years ago. So the idea was that, yes, we evolved in Africa, but we didn't get smart until we hit Europe. And that idea is still around. But actually, Africans were smart long before humans living in Europe were smart.
Yeah. We should really emphasize that. I mean, if anybody had any, I'm sure nobody here did have any such concept, that any of those old Victorian ideas that there's some ladder of progress and that there are some parts of humankind somehow more closely related to chimps is just completely just not backed up at all by modern evolutionary science. It's just no way. Every member of Homo sapiens is equally distantly related. We've worked particularly with African hunter-gatherers, and those are African hunter-gatherers living in today, 21st century, just the same human beings as we all are. So there's no way that any part of Homo sapiens is more closely related to chimps or bonobos. I think that's very clearly understood by everybody here. Those were all ideas that belonged in a time of colonialism and imperialism that we haven't abandoned yet, but is definitely an era, a different era. We want to talk a bit more about chimp and bonobo migration. Sorry,
Camilla, might this be a good time to also insert the caveat about the human centricity of this discussion overall? relative to chimps and bonobos.
Okay. Do
Yeah.
you want to say anything about that? Or,
Well, not as expertly as you or Chris would say, but this is something that we try to make sure that we raise in the course of the discussion, that we are limited by the fact that we are human, and as much as we can experiment and study and observe, we ultimately really don't know what is going on in a bonobo's mind or what is going on in a chimp's mind. And we use the analogy of the blind man and the elephant, where we're feeling about, we're experimenting, we're making hypotheses and testing them and proving them or disproving them. But ultimately, what we have is limited by the fact that we are humans, and we will never, well, as far as we can now, be able to see things from a chimp's perspective to really determine what they dream about, if they dream, and how they communicate that. So just wanted to make sure we highlighted that.
Okay, thanks for that reminder, Helen. I mean, it's inevitable that we're going to anthropomorphize, and in many of the experiments that are done, particularly in captive with lab chimps, in research programs like the ones that Michael Tomasello especially was conducting in Leipzig, it's almost impossible not to import onto chimpanzees or bonobos something about the ways that we think about the world. So if anybody read through Michael Tomasello's Why Don't Apes Point chapter, even the fact of pointing is something that's an extremely human thing to do, which may be quite alien. Why should a chimp necessarily produce this kind of gesture? Why should it be what they do, and why should we expect that to be what they do? But nevertheless, it's very interesting to try to examine, why aren't they doing that? Why are we doing that? And what does that tell us about certain differences in terms of cognition and relationships between chimpanzee individuals and human individuals? We've got a couple of questions, Michael and Zan. Zan, did you want to ask Michael?
Well, I know Frans de Waal was mentioned earlier, and he did a lot of work on the morality of bonobos, and I was thinking about just you have that emotions, love and care for each other, friends, and that, but humans do that not just with each other, but also with other species. So I was trying to think if there's any examples of chimpanzees, bonobos, whatever, and I was just kind of thinking, like, Coco the gorilla had a pet cat. I think Frans de Waal also mentioned some stuff about a bonobo that adopted an elephant in an animal sanctuary, if I remember correctly, I hope. So I think maybe that's sort of a similarity that points to moral behavior. I know morality, religion, I see is a little bit further down the list, but this idea that it isn't just about us, but what we do affects the world around us and affects other species and affects other things besides just us. Other animals, I don't think, have that ability to look outward to the world and say, a dog's not going to say, if I dig this hole, how's that going to affect the lawn? It's just going to dig the hole. Where a human and maybe a chimpanzee, a bonobo, might look at that and say, well, how's what my actions going to affect the outer world, not just how it's going to affect me.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Zan, do you want to add something in?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to go back to what Chris said earlier about that dominance occurs more successfully when there's scarcity, when there's no abundance. And I was wondering, because for humans, there's definitely there's a manufactured scarcity through capitalism and states and all these massive institutions that people have created to assert dominance. And I was just wondering, if there's a parallel with chimps. Is there like institution making or like a creating scarcity to assert dominance, or is that not happening?
Can I say Jerome Lewis is a wonderful expert on all that, all of that, and he's described what he calls the scarcity myth. And it's the myth that we still suffer scarcity in the world. And he takes the hunter-gatherers he works with in the western part of the Congo who can't understand hunger and starvation. And the reason is because they'd always share. And Jerome's pointed exactly what you're saying. If only we would share the way hunter-gatherers share, there wouldn't be scarcity. There's enough for all of us. But of course, as you say, capitalism invents and creates and maintains scarcity, because without the scarcity, we won't be all in competition with each other. And then, of course, capitalism itself would collapse. So, I mean, congratulations, you're saying exactly what we do think. And we do, there is enough for all of us, but, you know, but we need to share. And the one thing we don't get, especially these days, is sharing. I mean, increasingly, all the inequalities are just intensifying, with a tiny proportion of the world's population monopolizing the world's wealth. And that's actually not too far, in principle, from the kind of arrangements you have with some of these very hierarchical common chimps. So in many ways, capitalism is nearer to chimp society than most other people, and certainly much nearer than hunter-gatherers, who are furthest removed, actually, of all of us, from the chimp type of competition and conflict, because they're so into sharing, they're so egalitarian by, you know, almost by instinct. It's great to share. It gives meaning to your life. It makes you feel valued and useful. And so.
Society's always been part of our magical experience, as well as our.
Could people mute the background if you've got background noise?
Just the roast beef.
Somebody mute. Thanks, Jan. Katrin, you hadn't spoken yet.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the way that chimps have had so much more focus than bonobos, and I'm wondering, is that just due to their geographic area and that they were just easier to study, and then I also wonder how our self-understanding might be different, and how the views of people like Wrangham or Steven Pinker might be different if bonobos had been the primary area of study and the way that we now understood ourselves.
Yeah.
Well, it's absolutely true. Because of all these wars in the Congo, it was very difficult for primatologists to do the kind of studies in safety, the kind of studies that were done among common chimps. And it was mostly Japanese primatologists, very brave, that began to study bonobos in the wild. And there's no question about it. I mean, our views of our closest relatives would have been radically different had we started with the bonobos instead of with the common chimps that Jane Goodall and Richard Wrangham studied. So absolutely, yes.
The speaker at the radical anthropology class on Tuesday evenings, which, if there are people here who don't know, we generally run a class which is available on Zoom on Tuesday evenings. We have Lucy Cook, who is the author of Bitch. And this is a book looking at the way that science, as a very patriarchal institutionally, science has looked at the evolution of female strategies across species. And when she talks about bonobos and chimps, she is very much talking about this issue that, you know, the patriarchy is focused on generally much more male-dominated chimpanzees, and has marginalized, and we can take Richard Wrangham as an example of this patriarchy, has marginalized bonobos, or has belittled the idea, or you know, dismissed the idea that there may be female dominance in bonobos. And yeah, it would have really opened up a quite different perspective if we'd had a much more balanced understanding of this range and variability of the potential of chimpanzee strategies, almost for sure. And have we got, I was going to say, just suggest that we say something about the issue of sharing resources and cooperation, both for chimps and bonobos, and the question of economics and work, Jacek was previously saying there's no family structure as such, no nuclear family structure anyway, with chimp males as fathers. Do they behave as fathers? To what extent do they behave as fathers? Do they contribute economically? What sort of cooperation? As Michael was suggesting, is there any chimp or bonobo concept of a kind of public good that their activity would affect the whole community and therefore they maybe need to adjust their behavior? What about that aspect? Do either Michael or Jacek want to say any more, or anybody? Or Jacek, were you going to say something else?
Yeah, if I may, but it's related to the question you asked, but just a small reminder that it's very dangerous to let a guy from Eastern Europe to a gathering of left sympathizers from the West. So I have to make a remark on the capitalism and the scarcity of resources. I think it's making life easy to blame things on capitalism or on any other system, because I have lived under a system which was not capitalist, and I can assure you that the resources were managed much worse than under capitalism. So maybe the problem is not a kind of a system. Maybe the problem is our dominant and competitive element in our human nature, which we are trying to explore here, which determines us somehow to construct systems which are at the end of the day ineffective or not sufficient to manage the resources which could be sufficient if they were well managed, which leads us to the resources, right? I don't know much. Do the chimps shares? I think it's the most important questions here, because the hunters-gatherers share. That's a very common trait, that food is gathered or hunted individually but shared collectively. So there is no advantage actually, and no sense in nuclear family, which is another paradox, because the hunter is not providing his own child better than any other child. But I think chimps don't share generally, do they?
So do you want to talk about that, Chris? Or
Ian, have you got your hand up?
Ian, go.
No, Ian.
Ian, do you want to talk to that?
Yes. Yes. I mean, you're quite right. Chimps don't share. I mean, the example to look at will be where has often been called their cooperative hunting. But hopefully, if you've read the Tomasello paper, he touches on that there, and he says, like, this isn't cooperation as we understand it, of a shared goal. It's more sort of contingent decision making at any particular moment. Where should I be to maximize my chances of getting hold of some of this meat, this monkey that they're all excited about? And from a female perspective, most of them are sort of, they've got these reproductive burdens, youngs, they're not likely to be present when the monkey is killed. And those who are maybe closing in quickest on the site are going to be maybe young females who may be just reaching sexual maturity. They're not carrying infants and so on. They might have a chance of some of that meat in return for sex, which has been dubbed a kind of prostitution scenario. But that is radically different from what we know from hunter-gatherers. So, and that's about the closest we get to sort of cooperation, I think. You have these alliances. Yeah, no, sorry, that's wrong, because I mean, Chris was talking about again, but it's like contingent. All these females are pissed off about this male bully sort of trying to intimidate a subordinate male and trying to discipline him. But so those two examples are the closest we get to cooperation, I think.
May I ask immediately, have we ever observed the altruist behavior between chimps, which would suit this model that I'm offering something to you, hoping that one day you might offer something to me?
No.
Was it ever observed between chimps? No.
No.
Well, there is, hang on, wait a minute.
With grooming, perhaps.
There has been an analysis of, because like other monkeys and apes, chimpanzees, particularly chimps, males, use grooming an enormous amount to cement bonds, social bonds, and to create alliances. And this is relevant to the meat sharing also. But it has been an analysis of grooming being a kind of currency of reciprocity. If I do this for you, you'll do that back for me. And also between males and females, that if males will groom and female and maybe offer protection to females, females may be receptive to males, that kind of reciprocity. But the problem with reciprocity is always one of currency, and how do you monitor the exchange process? It's very difficult. It's very cognitively demanding, actually. So with hunter-gatherers, sharing is usually not a matter of reciprocity at all. Somebody brings food back, it gets shared. Nobody's counting who has had this bit, who has had that bit. With chimp cooperative hunting, when the kill of the monkey's been made, and they're tearing apart this little monkey, it's horrible, and eating it like almost there. As Ian said, you've got to be right there to get a piece of that meat. But the male who may be able to hold on to the monkey will give benefits to his allies. He will let allies take pieces of meat. And this is again a type of a way that alliances that are used politically get cemented. So there's levels of cooperation for purposes of creating quite nepotistic alliances, and the sort of cooperation that may be underlying the cooperative hunting. But we also get examples of cooperation that are quite remarkable. And I've mentioned the tool use, medication. We've got quite a lot of information about chimps' use of medication, their abilities to find and select, particularly vermicides. I can't remember the proper term now. Leaves that will take away parasites, that will remove parasites, and they have a kind of medicine chest. But also they have been observed recently applying insects, catching and applying insects to wounds or lesions on, and they will do this with other chimpanzees. So it may be a kind of favor or kind of something, part of their grooming strategy or part of their grooming repertoire, that they will apply medication potentially to other chimpanzees who might be relatives or friends. So, you know, there's this level of cooperation on a quite personal, individualistic sort of basis. But what is not really evident in chimpanzees, I mean, the other aspect of cooperation, of course, is the male alliances that are patrolling territories and are kind of reinforcing the boundaries between one group and another group. And that definitely is another example of cooperation, again, amongst the males as allies, protecting what they consider to be their territory, their females, from any outside influence. So we've got some remarkable examples of cooperation. any more contribution or comeback for that? Jay, did you want to go? And then maybe we should think about the Tomasello a little bit.
Yeah, so I was, I think, caught by the idea of or the way that you talked about grooming as a currency and reciprocity going on there. Because where my mind went was what we know about, or what I've been reading about vagus nerve stimulation, bringing your nervous system to states of rest by soothing techniques, by, you know, tapping yourself here, by holding people and that kind of thing. And, you know, that kind of experience of having somebody of like close touch being expressed as a currency was really interesting to me, because I don't know if this is useful thinking or not, but when I hear currency, I sort of hear something divorced or separated from what a sensing body is going through, and that I don't know, I just have been stuck since that first question that I asked about what medium are we talking about chimp experiences in, and how much like internal experiences is actually in there.
Right. Okay. I better explain a little bit there. You're absolutely right. The grooming and those kinds of behaviors are understood very much in terms of reduction of stress, touch, and chimpanzees and bonobos tend to have much more sexual expression, with what Chris talked about, the GG rubbing, which is particularly a way of females doing bonding. So this is very much sexual acts. I mean, it has sort of intense sexual pleasure associated to it. Whereas chimps tend to do this intensive grooming, really getting stuck, really focused grooming and intimate, used as ways to sometimes to reconcile when they've had fights. They can repair their relationships by getting into these very intimate, trusting, situations. So that's often a male thing, quite frequently. And it's well known that type of grooming reduces with endorphins, reduces stress, and it's very much known that. But people studying primates in terms of primate ecology, behavioral ecology, do talk it is alienating. You're absolutely right, but they do talk in terms of a currency that it's a form of exchange. How do you prove that you are the friend of another primate, another monkey or ape? By spending your time with them and spending your valuable time doing grooming as a way to show your friendship and reinforce that bond. So that's where the expression of currencies is coming from. And of course, it is an emotional response and an emotional relationship, but these very Darwinian perspectives, evolutionary perspectives, are trying to work out, the relationships between animals within social groups. These primates, these monkeys and apes, have very complex relationships, which for most other species only occur in like pair bonds. But amongst primates, these kinds of intense friendships and buddy relationships go beyond pair bonds, and not just necessarily your pairs. They can be your relatives, but you can also make friends with non-relatives. And it's through these mechanisms that gets done, that happens. I don't know if that helps respond to it. We've got more questions from Helen.
I don't have so much a question as a comment because grooming does show up, and I remember it was you who wrote this paper, Camilla, in the way female alliances work among some African communities. The women getting together to braid each other's hair and take care of each other is a fundamental way in which they demonstrate loyalty to each other and form the alliances that help them navigate the patriarchal societies that they live in.
Yeah, some of the people who did a lot of work on grooming with monkeys and apes, they were also looking at cliques where humans were doing hairdressing or that kind of thing as well, and saying, well, there's similarities here between the ways that humans respond and the ways that our primate relatives respond. Absolutely. And I agree with you. I think things like doing hairdressing. I mean, my experience in Africa was of so many. The beauty salons was the actual core of so many villages where people gathered, and it was a woman's space where they gathered, and it was so much being shared. I think that's really, really important. Sharing of beauty tips, sharing of cosmetics, sharing of hairdressing. I think it's absolutely key, critical.
Right, and I actually have some experiences of that because the hair salons we would go to would be an environment where women from different classes really would get together. You'd have these very wealthy women coming together with women, who are not so wealthy, and it was just a space to share experiences and perspectives. And there was, of course, a dominance of the people who had more resources and things like that, but it really turned into almost an egalitarian space where people just listen to each other and talk to each other. Quite interesting.
Yes, and I imagine that within that space, relationships become much more egalitarian. That if somebody did have lots more wealth or power, it kind of got left at the door to some extent, and that would be much.
I mean, there was usually a deference to the madame of the salon, the woman who owned the establishment and trained the girls. There was a lot of respect to her, but also the relationships that she had with the other women and who were her friends and who weren't really her friends. And it was, and I observed a lot of this as a teenager, as a young girl. So it was always interesting to kind of sit and go to different shops in different parts of the town I lived in and just see how that dynamic played out.
Yeah, you're a natural anthropologist, I think. It's a perfect place to do some anthropology there. Watch there. Yeah. Catherine, did you want to, or Michael? Catherine, and then Michael.
Yeah. Did we talk about cooperative eyes?
Yeah, we haven't really said much about cooperative eyes or about Tomasello. I don't know how many people did watch the shall we? I can show a couple of pictures of those cooperative eyes if you're interested in that, because it is a very fundamental aspect and mechanism, and we're going to come back to it maybe later as well with the cooperative breeding. Shall I do that?
Yes,
let's go for it. And if I can pick up my where am I? No, that's not the right one. Where am I? Where's my Oh, that's the slides. Okay. What have I got here? Let me just open it up. Can you see all right? Yeah, I just had some slides contrasting chimpanzees with their fantastic muscles compared to the bonobos, who were very renowned as these kind of hippie lovemaking apes, rather more gracile. Let's see if we can go forward from that. But it's worth remembering, in that contrast between chimps and bonobos there, it's worth remembering Richard Wrangham, in his little film, is talking about the orders of frequency of violence in chimp society, bonobo society, and human society. In chimps, we understand there's a lot of violence, but there also is with bonobos. Of course, that violence is often directed females on males, in fact. But there's orders of magnitude greater incidence of violence in bonobo society, even compared to humans. And one of the great books written on human evolution, Mothers and Others by Sarah Hrdy, it starts with this idea, this story about what if you had a whole bunch of chimpanzees on a plane? Just think about how humans can sit on a long haul flight, and they're very stressed and they're very bothered and they're very, they're not feeling very good, and they want to get elbow room for their neighbors, and there's a child crying behind, and humans put up with it. They just put up with all that. But if you had chimpanzees in that plane, by the time you landed, Sarah Hrdy just says you would have blood everywhere. You would have fingers and toes. You would have people, the chimps shouting and screaming, and they would be in a terribly stressed state. So this is
be having sex with each other as well.
Well, the chimps, the bonobos would have sex with each other, but chimps would, it would be maybe different with bonobos from chimps, but it would be a very stressful situation. I'll skip on that slide, because that's really about, that's a picture of female bonobos hanging out together with their babies. And usually you never see that with female chimps, because it's very difficult in the wild for a female with a baby, a female chimp with a baby. She needs to find her forage and her resources, and so she can't she can't hang out with other females very much, because she's kind of in competition for the resources, or that depends on the environment. Bonobos, because they have such good herbs and fruit resources, are able to hang together. It's just showing the female solidarity going on with the bonobo group. But let's look at the cooperative eyes. So the idea here, on the right, we've got a selection of different great apes, but there's a chimpanzee up in the top right. There's I think that's a bonobo there. On that one, there's some orangutans in there as well. So their eyes are very round shaped, and they're generally dark with no corner. They're just kind of dark, different coloring perhaps, but basically dark with a round shape. And for humans, whoever we're talking about on the planet, we have what are called cooperative eyes. The reason they're called that is this shape of the almond with the white background, that very clear white sclera, and every human being on the planet will have eyes of this kind. And what this does is it really makes very clear from one human to another, which way is a person looking? What is a person engaged with? What are they interested in? And somebody looking at that individual can see immediately, are you engaged with me, or are you interested in something else? Are you looking at something else? And it makes it extraordinarily easy. It's a fundamental mechanism by which we can mesh our emotional states. It's very easy for us to share in each other's thinking, to share our thoughts with each other and guess what each other are thinking. But it seems that apes don't have cooperative eyes. However, recently, some of the chimpanzee people have been fighting back on that, because there seems to be a degree of variation on sclera. So the chimpanzee on the left is a guy from Gombe. He's called Mr. Wurzel, and he's quite famous amongst the Gombe chimps because he does have rather strong white on his eyes. And these chimps on the right, these are from Ngogo in the forest in Uganda. And we've got a range of variation at different ages, with some of them showing sclera and some of them just a little bit of light color, and then others of them quite dark, really quite dark. so it's that there's showing a variability of how much of these eyes with the whites, so that other individuals can tell which way they're actually looking. But what is definitely true is that chimpanzee eyes are very round. And one way we could describe this is to say, that chimpanzees and even bonobos are kind of wearing sunglasses. They're wearing dark glasses. And if you know what it's like talking to anybody who is wearing dark glasses while you are not wearing, immediately that creates a kind of blind. You don't know, what are they thinking? What are they feeling? They're sort of blanking themselves off from you. And it creates a completely different scenario for communication. So that's the basics of cooperative eyes. Even though the chimp people are trying to fight back and suggest that there may be a level of cooperative eyes with chimpanzees, it seems to be very limited. There's variation. But with humans, it's like 100%. It's like what human eyes are like. Modern humans have these cooperative eyes. And I would guess that Neanderthals also had such cooperative eyes, and their ancestors.
Just to sum up, the advantage to an adult male gorilla silverback, the advantage of having like eyes like sunglasses, and we know like the sort of cliche from gangster films, you know, mobsters with sunglasses. You want to look out for the sunglasses. You want to know what other people are thinking. You don't want them to know what you're thinking. So the advantage to a dominant male gorilla is that nobody can read his thoughts. And of course, but if you want to be transparent, then you don't need those eyes. You want the kind of eyes which give away what you're thinking.
So monkey and ape, and particularly great ape society, gorilla society, chimpanzees, even those hippie bonobos, are very well described as being Machiavellian. Individuals are they are hustling, they're competitive, they create alliances, just like Machiavelli described political alliance formation, but they're cooperating in some respects in order to compete. And their eyes are suited to that kind of social environment. That isn't to say that humans are never Machiavellian. Evidently we are, but we're also capable of what's called intersubjectivity, this ability to mesh our mental states. And that's really underlying the article of Tomasello talking about the critical difference between chimps, bonobos, great apes on the one hand, and ourselves on the other. Great apes do not have what's known as shared intentionality, that they have an idea of we together, that they have a shared goal, compared to our readiness to understand each other's thoughts and work out, what do we want to do together? What are we going to share together? And there are many, many experiments done by Tomasello and his colleagues in the Leipzig labs, where they would do these games and experiments with chimpanzees in the morning and children, young children, pre-verbal young children in the afternoon, to get a kind of really a handle on the comparisons between, you know, chimpanzee cognition and child cognition, and the factor that they were really identifying as key and critical was this aspect of of children's willingness to understand cooperation, their readiness to understand cooperation. Particularly the very simple experiment with the buckets, the baited buckets, where this is about the pointing gestures, where the human experimenters, so one experiment would hide sweeties or goodies or treats in one of the buckets, bait the buckets. Then another experiment would come in, and make gesture. Well, first of all, they'd kind of indicate by shifting the buckets. And then they would use gestures and gaze by looking at the bucket where the treats were. And for chimpanzees, this whole procedure was just puzzling. They didn't understand it at all. Only when a human would lunge for the bucket, did the chimp think, there must be food there. So the chimp would go for the bucket where the food was. With children, as soon as the experiment was pointing at the bucket, the child was reading that gesture. Well, they're helping me. They're telling me where is the food. That gesture's for me. It's helping me. So Tomasello is bringing out this aspect that chimpanzees do not expect to have help. They're not motivated to share. They're not motivated to tell each other about where there is food because they're in competition.
Just to emphasize, you'd be standing there as an experimenter with two buckets in front of you, and one's got bananas in. And if you point to the one with the bananas to the chimpanzee, he'll go for the other one because he'll know you must be lying.
They responded at worse than chance. So you might be right that they're actually thinking maybe you're trying to trick me. I mean, they could be as Machiavellian as that even. There is another story of Tomasello's, which is, it really is telling the difference. That he tells the story of a whimpering chimpanzee child, a chimpanzee child that's like lost and doesn't know where its mum is. And the other female chimps, they know who that child is. They know who the child's mum is. And if one of the female chimps knows where the mum is, it would be very, very easy for her to lift her, to just gesture in the direction or to indicate, but she won't. She just doesn't bother. She might know, but somehow she just hasn't got a motivation to let that child know. Just no motivation to help or to inform. And if you imagine that situation in any human society, it would be completely impossible to imagine leaving a whimpering child without trying to work out whose child is that. Let's help the child. That is such a revealing story about the differences, the levels of difference of cooperation within chimp society as an example and human society. I mean, anywhere you were on the planet.
Just to emphasize, it used to be imagined that they're just too stupid or something like that. They haven't got the cognitive capacity to point. But the point is that in grooming, when you want somebody to groom you here or there, you've got the capacity, but of course you're being selfish. It's in your interests. But to point for somebody else's benefit, they kind of can't be bothered. It's nothing to do with capacity. They got the capacity, they just can't be bothered. There's no group, there's no sense of a we, there's no group level morality. The different females don't kind of love and care for all the members, all the children of the group, if you like, in the way that any group of humans would tend to do. Obviously, there's a variability there as well, of course. Hunter-gatherers are incredibly supportive of one another's children. In fact, very often there's not even a word to describe mummy for a child without meaning all the different mummies. You can't even distinguish between the different carers, and they're all called mummy or daddy or whatever it is in the language.
We're nearly reaching time, but Helen, did you want to take over a bit?
Right. Well, first to thank you for that amazing presentation and the slides, and really making that distinction about how the eyes play in. Now I'm curious if an experiment with monkeys that have visible sclera, with chimps that have visible sclera, would differ perhaps from those who don't, and what that might reveal. Maybe someone somewhere has done it. That would be interesting to see.
It's only just opening up. I mean, there's because the Gombe chimp seems to be 2% in Gombe, whereas in the Ngogo, it seems like 15% have more white sclera. So that raises the possibility that it will be different percentages in different types of environments? Possibly. There's also differences between orangutan populations, Borneo and Sumatra. So this could play back to differences of willingness to social cooperation. It could play back. So actually it could be proof for the cooperative eye hypothesis, in fact.
Interesting.
Still got lots of research on that.
I have to keep an eye on that. I want to make sure I highlight Lucinda's question in the chat. Does this change in different environments and cultures? And are chimps more cooperative in times of plenty? I think we kind of addressed this to some extent, didn't we?
I think the chimp missed the early part of the evening.
All right. Okay, and then there's also one more comment from Lucinda, which I wanted to make sure we got to, about being careful of not falling out of the idea that humans are also animals in how we talk about these things, because we have that bias that we will take on sometimes, that we are not animals, and we have lots of proofs to the contrary. So just wanted to make sure we got your comments in there, Lucinda. And Michael, you seem to have your hand up as well.
Yeah. I'm just wondering, you're talking about all this in terms of cooperation and intersubjectivity, but to me it seems more like it's about manipulation and prevarication. You're talking about this social currency. They're not just grooming each other for building relationships, but they're grooming each other towards some sort of goal, and that goal could be something that's helpful for the group. It could be something that's just helpful for them. It could be something that's honest. It could also be something that's dishonest. One of the main differences between communication and language is that, or difference between an open call system and closed call system, is that an open call system you could prevaricate. You can lie, you can be deceptive. And it seems like, with this cooperative eyes, I think of them more like manipulative eyes. Or, this cooperative behavior, it's more like manipulative behavior, whether that's for good or bad. It could be manipulating for the good or for the worse. But I'm just wondering if, maybe we're thinking about this in terms of cooperation, or maybe we should be thinking about this more in terms of manipulation.
And Lucinda, do you want to come in on that? I have some comments, yeah.
Yeah, I do, because I think those are value judgments that are being made rather than practical applications. Manipulation versus cooperation, that's a value judgment on outcome, based on outcomes and selfishness or not, in a way. So I'm not sure if that's a useful distinction to make. And just to go back to my comment about whether what I was curious about, which kind of relates to this a little bit still, is I was wondering whether, because chimps have different cultures in different environments, and I was wondering whether there's any data on them being more cooperative in an environment of plenty, and actually their culture being different in that way as well, if it's more matriarchal or the women or the females have more power.
It's exactly that, Lucinda. Yes, we did cover that at the beginning of this evening. I think you came in a bit late.
I did, unfortunately.
Yeah, with bonobos obviously at the sort of end of the spectrum in terms of the abundance of resources that enables females to really hang together.
Yeah, I understood that. I was thinking more about chimpanzees specifically, though. You were talking about chimpanzees operating differently in different environments of abundance or of competition. And so there was more specifically about chimpanzees and not bonobos versus chimpanzees kind of thing.
There is a difference. The Thai forest chimps the females are much more likely to form alliances. Gender relationships are much more egalitarian, if you like, not exactly, but much more relaxed. And it's just that, bonobos are chimpanzees. They're on a spectrum, and the richer the resources, the less the male dominance, because the females can forage together, therefore form alliances, and therefore defend themselves against male attempts to beat them up.
One other aspect that we haven't really covered, but it's worth mentioning here, is that which sex actually has more tool use. It tends to be chimpanzee females who do much more tool use and kind of inventions of digging wells and things of that kind. Why? because it is females that are under the pressure of finding resources. So famously, the community and in Thai forest, where they have the anvil stones that have an archaeology of maybe thousands of years in some of the sites, where the chimpanzee mothers have been cracking nuts over the generations and showing their little offspring. So their little offspring are watching and they begin to learn. That is the form of transmission that is operative. There's also Fongoli chimps it's Senegal, isn't it? Yeah. Fongoli, with a very dry environment where there is spears. They actually use spears for spearing bush babies. But again, it's females doing that rather than our image of, oh, it must be males doing that. And it's females doing it, because females are the ones who desperately need the resources for raising infants with very large brains. So, those aspects are very strongly biased towards females. But I wanted, before we kind of wind up, to respond to Michael on this issue of manipulation of signals and communication. It's something which we've thought about a great deal, and which definitely Chris will be coming back to in the fourth in this series, the Language and Laughter series, a talk at the end of the series. Grooming can't be dishonest. Grooming is a costly, worthwhile signal. You are giving another animal time and attention. There's nothing dishonest about it. You're proving that they are worth it to you through that. There's this well-known theory from Robin Dunbar about gossip and grooming, which I had a lot of discussion with over the years. But linguistic communication replacing grooming is replacing a very solid signal that's hard to fake with something that is eminently deceptive, potentially deceptive, and easily manipulated. I completely agree with you on that. But when it comes to the eyes, whilst I have no doubt you are right that humans in evolution, as they became capable of lying, of doing incredible, sophisticated tactical deception and mimesis, they could use eyes in all kinds of manipulative ways. But initially, in the evolution of our sort of shape of eyes with the clear white sclera compared to chimpanzee sunglasses eyes, this could not really evolve unless we had very trusting types of relationships. Doesn't mean all the relationships were trusting, but that within bubbles, there's certain relationships had to be very strongly trusting to enable cooperative eyes. We are going to talk more about the implications of cooperative eyes next time, when we're going to talk about gender relations in human evolution. And I particularly will have more to say about it. But just as an immediate response, I'm not sure we can carry on a lot longer, but let's take any questions we've got now.
Any research into what has the research been on mirroring behavior in chimpanzees and other primates? Like, do they engage in mirroring behaviors?
I mean, do they recognize themselves in the mirror?
No. I'm talking about like mirror behavior. How when two people are talking to each other and they'll tend to mirror each other's.
I recall a little bit in Sarah Hrdy's book, her great book, Mothers and Others, which I cannot recommend too much for anybody here. She's talking about how very young chimpanzees, again, they're in experimental situations where they're separate, they're orphan chimps, and it's not a natural social situation. But with very young chimpanzees, she's 11-week-old young chimps, they are very malleable in their responses, and indeed they will, if you've kind of stick out your tongue at one of these very young babies. They might stick their tongues out back to you, do what babies do, what human babies do. So she's talking about how that is a capacity. It's something there as a latent possibility within chimpanzees. But as the chimp grows up, they lose that. They no longer respond in that kind of way, which is the natural way for human babies. I think that's one aspect of mirroring that has been at least researched, but it has been researched in rather pathological circumstances, I think.
But we need to stop soon.
Yeah, we do. I mean, Jay, you have one last contribution, and then we should wind up. We're running too late now.
Sorry, I really appreciate that. I was really interested by the idea of trust and sort of building trust. And something that came up again through grooming and through I think it was male chimpanzees grooming each other after conflict to build bonds again. That rang an attachment theory bell for me. You know, all the psychologists worth their salt on Instagram are making infographics saying if you have conflicts with somebody and then you engage in close touch after that, it may be something which you actually don't need if you're trying to build a healthy relationship with somebody. I guess it's a comment of something which that brought up for me, but sort of as beside the idea of trust as something which just makes sense when you say the word, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We need to stop.
Yeah. Do Helen and Katrin just want to wind up for us and say goodbye?
Certainly. Well, just to thank Chris, Camilla, and again for your amazing research and contributions. And for everyone who had a question, a comment, we really appreciate you bringing it. And I really enjoyed this. And I'm looking forward to next time. Katrin, do you want to talk about the next couple of sessions?
Yeah, I was just
hi baby.
trying to find my workshop, my worksheet here. Hang on. Here we go. So next time is April 22nd. Same time, although because of daylight savings in London, it'll actually here in the States be an hour later. So check your clocks first. But April 22nd is going to be matriarchy or patriarchy, gender relations in human evolution. And we have 2 more sessions after that, one towards the end of May, looking at cooperative childcare, and one towards the end of June, looking at laughter and the origins of language. So you guys have been an amazing group, putting yourselves out there and asking questions, and it's been really fun to be learning with you guys for these last couple hours.
Absolutely. And we have
so much. Thanks for all the questions. They've been absolutely wonderful. Yeah.
So wrapping up, we have a question of a table of similarities and differences between chimps, bonobos, and humans, which we will send out with the link for the recording. And that's about it for today. Thank you all so much once again. This was incredibly fun.
Thank you, Helen.
See you next time.
Fantastic.
Yeah, thank you, Katrin and Helen, for helping us through this. It's all a bit experimental, but it's been very good.
Bye, everyone.